The owner of a large corporation secretly returns to her own office disguised as a cleaning lady. No one recognizes her, and she becomes an invisible witness to what is happening behind her back. She collects evidence of betrayal while being humiliated by those she once trusted. But the day she reveals her true identity, everything changes. Forever. Dawn was slowly awakening Madrid, bathing the streets in a soft golden light. The sky was turning shades of peach and indigo, and the first cool gusts of wind glided softly between the high-rises, still half asleep from the silence of the night. On a narrow stone street, a figure in a gray uniform stopped in front of the mirrored facade of the Aurea Capital Group skyscraper. A middle-aged woman with dark hair neatly pulled back into a tight bun and a cart filled with cleaning products. She lingered at the entrance for only a few seconds. Then she stepped forward and crossed the threshold. Nobody turned around. The usual rhythm of a business morning reigned in the corridor. Quick steps, the hum of conversations, the clink of cups, the sliding rustle of papers. People in suits hurried to their offices, not noticing the figure in the corner. It moved along the perimeter like a shadow. Its movements were precise and verified. In her hands, gloves. In her eyes, determination. Elena Morales, owner of Aurea Capital. She didn't come as CEO that day. She came as Carmen, the cleaner. The last few months had been troubling. It started with little things. Reports where the numbers didn't add up, layoffs without explanation, loyal employees leaving. Anonymous letters started arriving at her personal email. Someone from the inside was warning. The company is rotting, and the rot is coming from the top. Elena was not a woman to take rumors at face value, but her intuition, the gift that had made her a leader, told her that where there's smoke, there's fire. She didn't want a public scandal. She didn't want an investigation that would turn into a circus. She wanted to see with her own eyes, hear with her own ears. To do this, she needed to become invisible. And she did. At the cloakroom by the service entrance, she was given a uniform without question. Her face was almost unknown. She rarely showed up at the office, sending deputies to meetings. It was her choice to trust and delegate. Now she was paying the price. The first person she saw was Inés Valverde, the HR director. Tall, with brightly painted nails and an icy gaze. "New girl?" she asked, not even deigning to look at her. "What's your name?" "Carmen. Here are the worksheets. Don't touch anything in the main offices. And don't interfere." The tone had been honed over years of command. Cold, condescending. "Understood." Elena nodded and took the papers. Her first route led to the 6th floor, to the financial director. Esteban Rojas's office was in the corner, with panoramic windows and leather furniture. On the desk were 2 phones, several folders, a mug of coffee. When Elena entered, he was inside, drinking coffee and laughing with 2 other employees. "Another Carmen," he muttered without turning around. "Every month it gets cheaper. We'll start hiring volunteers soon." The colleagues giggled. Elena, with her head down, silently continued cleaning. He didn't even slow down. This company is becoming a market, not a place of power. She wiped the table while they discussed the football match, spilling coffee on the carpet. "I dropped it. By accident," Rojas said, looking at her with mild disdain. "Will you clean it up?" "Of course," she answered calmly, and she put it away, clenching her teeth. Hours later, while cleaning the lobby near the elevator, she ran into Rafael Mendoza, the operations manager, walking along, talking loudly on his phone, and not slowing down when he nearly hit her cart. "Out of the way," he said, and walked on without even turning his head. Elena watched him disappear into the office, and something inside her twitched. But she didn't follow him. Not yet. During the day, the atmosphere was tense. But it was only at night, when the building was empty, that the real work began. That's when Elena moved quietly through the floors, peering into offices, checking trash cans, opening drawers. She had access. She had a purpose. On the 3rd day, she came across a list of employees who had been fired in the last 2 months, many without cause. At the same time, their places were taken by Inés's friends without experience but with impressive contracts. Elena photographed documents, saved them on a flash drive, as if she were putting together pieces of a puzzle. Every day brought new evidence. Every evening, new wounds. Neglect became the norm. One day, when she sat down for a minute on a corridor bench, Ines noticed her. She approached quickly, like a predator. "We don't keep lazy people. You don't belong here if you're tired." Her two assistants stood nearby. They giggled. Elena said nothing. She just stood up and left. Her silence had more power than 1,000 words. So the days passed. Elena saved, observed, endured. She saw those who should have been punished rise up and those who worked honestly leave. She had heard herself referred to as an old queen who had lost her touch long ago. And one day, in the quiet of the evening office, she walked past the conference room where Rojas, Mendoza, and Ines were gathered. "She's probably sitting somewhere at a golf club," Rojas chuckled. "And we're building our future here," Mendoza added. "The main thing is to line our pockets before everything goes bust," Ines whispered. Elena stopped, leaned against the wall, and smiled for the first time in many days. Now she had everything. And soon it would be their end. As the day turned to evening and the sunlight began to dissolve into the soft reflections of the glass facades, the Aurea Capital Group building froze. The space, which during the day was buzzing with calls, footsteps, laughter, commands, and constant movement, in the evenings seemed to switch to standby mode. Most of the employees left the office, leaving behind only a light trail of perfume and unresolved matters. It was at this time that Elena Morales, or as she was now known, Carmen, began her real work. In the morning, she followed orders, wiping down tables, cleaning glass partitions, mopping conference room floors. No one she passed made eye contact with. She was background, part of the furniture, and that was perfect. But at night, when the elevators no longer rang, when the guards nodded off at their monitors, when the lamps in the offices glowed only dimly, she revealed her cards. It all started in Rojas's office. She knew he didn't lock his drawers. His confidence in his own inviolability made him careless. In the bottom drawer of his desk, she found the first oddity, a folder marked Audit. At first glance, nothing special. But Elena was not naive. She took out her phone, turned on the camera, and started filming pages. There were lists of contractors. Some of the amounts were inflated 3 or even 5 times. Firms whose names she had never seen before. Her eye caught one line: Technova Solutions, €87,500 for consulting services. She knew the company. Or rather, she knew it didn't exist. She had once, a year ago, had to reject their bid as fictitious. Now they were on the invoice as a contractor who had already been paid. She quickly made copies and put everything back in place. As she left the office, she felt anger rising in her chest. Not a sharp, flashing anger, but the kind that grew slowly, like a tide threatening to wash away everything in its path. The next night she returned, this time to Rafael Mendoza's office. Rafael was more careful. The drawers were locked, but she knew where the key was kept. She had seen him throw it into a vase on the windowsill in a hurry. She opened the bottom drawer. There was a flash drive. No signature. Regular. Gray. She hid it in her pocket, wiped off the traces, and left. She opened the flash drive only the next morning, at home, over a cup of black coffee. Folders flashed on the screen. CONF_A, Pago_Extra, Bancos Interno. Inside are spreadsheets of transfers to offshore accounts, correspondence with Rojas and Ines. They discussed which departments to cut, which reports to falsify, which names to include in blacklists. No one will suspect anything if you distribute the amounts by week. The main thing is to control the HR department. Ines is on our side. If there is an audit, we will say that the system failed. The pages scrolled before Elena's eyes like scenes from a horror movie, only real. And the main monsters in it sat in her offices, subordinated to her, signed under her name, and stole. From her. From the company. From people. During the day, Elena continued to be Carmen. At some point, she started keeping a diary. A regular notebook hidden under a trolley in a double bottom. Day 9. Rojas signed a fictitious contract with Global Fix. The amount is €125,000. The company was registered a week ago. The share capital is €3. Mendoza discussed with Ines the appointment of his niece. She has no experience. He said, the main thing is to be on your own. Page after page, she recorded everything. But the most terrible discovery was not the theft, but how it destroyed people. One day, she witnessed the firing of Antonio, a modest mid-level manager who had worked for the company for 8 years. He was called in, told there were budget cuts, and 10 minutes later he was walking out of the office carrying a box of personal belongings. That same morning, a new employee was brought into the office, the nephew of one of the right people. Antonio didn't cry. He just nodded to the guard at the exit. But there was such emptiness in his eyes that Elena could hardly resist running after him. She continued to gather evidence. More and more every day. She learned that Ines used the HR department for manipulation, increasing the salaries of her own people, undermining the salaries of others, promoting those who promised to keep quiet. At some point, Ines entered one of the offices, not knowing that Elena was inside. She was talking on the phone. Yes, we extended the contract with Consultora Blanca. My people are there. No, Elena doesn't know anything. She's been out of the game for a long time. Elena froze behind the curtain. Her heart was beating like a hammer. She recorded the conversation on a dictaphone. Now she hid sound. Documents. Correspondence. Now she had everything. But along with this came fatigue. Her body was giving in. She slept for 3 to 4 hours, 8 on the run. One day, while sitting down in the hallway to stretch her back, she heard a familiar voice. Are you sitting again? We don't pay for rest here. If you're having a hard time, make room. Ines stood before her with 2 assistants, her eyes cold, her lips pressed into a contemptuous smile. Elena stood up. Silently. Without an answer. She knew there would be an answer. And it would be loud. Her anger is not loud. Not sharp. But even. Cold. The kind that gets under the skin. She walked past Ines and promised herself just a little bit more. And everything will collapse. Day after day, Elena continued her double game. During the day, she was Carmen, the cleaner no one noticed, with a cart, rubber gloves, and a straight back. At night, she was an invisible investigator, methodically collecting evidence as if collecting dust in the cracks of a parquet floor. She began to see what had previously remained behind the facade of the glass office, hidden conversations in the corridors, the changing moods of employees, the anxiety in the voices of those who were afraid to say out loud what they knew. With each passing day, her vigilance grew. Every glance, every remark, even a pause in conversation could mean more than it seemed. She listened. Memorized. Sometimes she wrote it down. At some point, it became clear to her the company was not just papers and bills. It was people. And the people were scared, burned out, broken. Many of them walked around the office as if it were a minefield. Did you notice how quickly Rodrigo left IT? She heard one day while cleaning the office near the tech support department. He asked too much. And too honest. They don't keep people like that here. Elena paused, held her breath, and realized the corporate poison had taken root deeper than she had imagined. Friday was particularly tense. In the middle of the day, Rafael Mendoza held an impromptu meeting in his office with glasses of wine and loud laughter. Elena, as usual, was mopping the floors behind a glass partition, trying not to show her attention when he began a discussion with Rojas and Ines. Did you hear? A new batch of contractors came through, Mendoza said. They sent in their reports and didn't even notice that the company was registered in the name of my nephew's wife. The main thing is to change the signatures in time, Rojas chuckled. The bank in Panama runs like clockwork. But the old one still doesn't know, Ines put in. I think she's forgotten what the building looks like. Let him stay in his house on the hill. We decide everything ourselves here. The words were like poison. Slow but deadly. Elena felt her gloved fist clench. Her heart beat a heavy rhythm in her chest. She walked quietly into the hallway without making a sound. This time she didn't even take notes. Everything that was said was forever etched in her memory. Meanwhile, the attitude towards her became more and more dismissive. The employees, seeing that Carmen was a modest cleaner who did not engage in conversation and always lowered her gaze, allowed themselves more and more. When she was cleaning the floor in the conference room, Ines did not hesitate to walk across the freshly cleaned surface in her high heels, leaving wet footprints behind her. Oops, she called over her shoulder. Don't worry, Carmen, you can handle it. You hold a rag better than a pen. Her assistants laughed. Elena silently bent down and began wiping away the marks again. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew that every mockery was a brick in the future sentence. Another time, when she was cleaning Rojas's office, he walked in unannounced. He threw his briefcase on the table and, without even looking at her, said, "If you had any brains, you wouldn't work here. Although maybe you can't even read." He walked past, turned on the computer, and started typing the password, not paying the slightest attention to her. Elena felt the heat rising inside her. How she wished she could tell him the truth now, in one word, in one phrase. But she couldn't. Not yet. She looked down, grabbed the rag, and walked out. Sometimes she caught the glances of other employees. A young assistant named Laura looked at her differently than the others. Once, when Elena helped her pick up some spilled papers, she quietly whispered, "Thank you. You're the only one here who really helps." Elena just nodded, but she kept that phrase in her memory too. She knew that when it was all over, she would not only have to punish the guilty, but also support those like Laura, honest, invisible, strong. Every night, when the building was empty, Elena returned to the offices. Now she had 3 flash drives. One contained scans of fake contracts. The second contained copies of accounting entries. The third contained audio recordings. One of them was particularly important. In it, Rojas, in a conversation with an unknown interlocutor, discusses the transfer of a large sum of money to an offshore account. "I'm sure Morales won't show up," he says. "Even if she does, we'll say we signed on her instructions. Who's going to argue with the papers?" Elena listened to the passage over and over again. Rojas's voice was clear, calm, confident, but not for long. The hardest part came when her body started to give in. Her back hurt almost all the time. She woke up with numb arms, tired faster than before. One day, barely crossing the threshold of the reception hall, she sat down on a bench and closed her eyes for a second. Inés saw her first. "Relaxing?" Her voice was sharp. "This is not a resort, Carmen. If you are tired, there is a door. I have dozens of people who want to take your place." 2 employees nearby giggled. Elena stood up. Straight. Silently. She knew that the moment was getting closer when these words would be the last humiliating words from Inés's lips. That night, Elena finished analyzing the last of the documents. She had the full picture. A system of kickbacks, fictitious partnerships, financial manipulation. List of participants: Esteban Rojas, Rafael Mendoza, Inés Valverde. Evidence: contracts, records, emails. Motive: power, money, greed. She closed the laptop and straightened her back. At that moment, she was no longer Carmen. She was Elena Morales, owner of Aurea Capital Group. And her patience ran out. There was only the final act left. The one where the masks would be torn off and the faces would be exposed. The chapter of revenge was already ready to begin. Time passed like clockwork in the Aurea Capital Group office. At first glance, smoothly, without a hitch: negotiations, reports, meetings, coffee and paper cups. But Elena Morales could now see every crack in this shiny facade. She saw how the inside of the company building resembled a carefully polished cage where the truth was hidden behind numbers, documents behind fake signatures, and people behind titles. She didn't need any more proof. She already had everything. Everything to demolish this artificial pyramid built of lies and greed. All that was left was to choose the moment. And she chose. It all started with an email. A simple, formal invitation to an unscheduled meeting. Addressed to Esteban Rojas, Rafael Mendoza, Inés Valverde, and 2 of their closest confidants, Victor Gilberto from the legal department and Beatriz Rios from PR. Subject: strategic update of corporate policy. Sender: a secretary whose name even the executives themselves have long forgotten. The meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. Location: conference room on the 20th floor. Each of the invitees considered it a standard formality. Another meeting where they would talk about image, internal communications, and brand values again. No one paid attention to the oddity. The initiator was not one of them. But in the Aurea hierarchy, they are used to doing things without asking questions, especially if it does not concern money. 10 o'clock. They filed into the room one by one. Rojas with a clipboard and a smug grin. Mendoza with an unbuttoned jacket and a cup of coffee. Inés with perfectly coiffed hair in an Ash Rose business suit. Beatriz and Victor were quieter. They sensed something was wrong, but had neither the weight nor the courage to object. They passed the table where Elena usually sat. It was empty. "The projector has a white screen. Who called us here anyway?" Mendoza asked irritably, glancing at his watch. "I don't see the point in wasting the morning on." At that moment, the door behind them closed. Softly, tightly, and Elena entered the hall. Not in a gray uniform. Not with a rag. Not in the shadows. And as a hostess. She was wearing a deep dark blue pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back into a classic sleek bun. Her face was collected, focused, but in her eyes there was not icy severity, but something much more frightening for those who hoped to never see her again. Cold, silent knowledge. She walked along the wall without saying a word, stood at the screen, and turned on the presentation. The first image appeared on it, a scan of the contract with Rojas's signature. A fake contract. Then a table of transfers to an offshore. A call recording. A screenshot of the correspondence. A photo of a bank printout. All the slides went one after another. Smoothly, methodically, surgically precise. Not a word was said before Elena turned off the screen. The silence was so thick that it seemed as if the air in the room had disappeared. And then she spoke. You forgot who I am. You forgot whose name is at the foundation of this company. You forgot who gave you the opportunity to sit here. She stepped closer to the table. And you forgot that when a person becomes invisible, he begins to see everything. Rojas stood up, clearly wanting to seize the initiative. This is absurd. Who gave you? How did you even? He faltered, unable to find the usual instruments of pressure. Sit down, Esteban, she said calmly. This is not a negotiation. This is a death sentence. Mendoza was sweating. He looked from the screen to Elena, then to the door. He knew he couldn't get out of here the way he'd come in. Ines made one last attempt. All this can be discussed. Perhaps the information is distorted. No. Everything is confirmed, checked, and documented. And now I offer you a choice. You leave yourself. Or I will take this to the prosecutor's office. Beatrice screamed. Were you eavesdropping on us? Were you spying? No. I was protecting what I built from you. Silence. Elena approached each of them and placed a sheet of paper on the table in front of each. Simple wording, resignation letter. Signature. You have 3 minutes. Then security will come. Rojas wanted to tear the sheet, but his hand was shaking. He looked into Elena's eyes, and for the first time he felt not superior to her. Not equal. Not even defeated. Just exposed. And one after another they signed. When the guards appeared at the door, Elena turned to them. Take him out. No humiliation. No comments. Just take him out. Half an hour later, news spread through the building. The leadership had changed. The room where orders were usually given now became a symbol of justice. Those who had been silent for a long time exchanged glances in the corridors and for the first time allowed themselves to smile. Elena walked through each floor. Without pathos. Without tribunes. Just so people knew she was here. She was back. And she was left alone in her office. There was a flash drive on the table. Empty. She took it out and threw it in the trash can. No need to hide anymore. Now it's time to build anew. On clean. On honest. On our own. After a storm there is always silence, dense, deep, wary. A silence in which the past seems to freeze and the future slowly takes its first breath. The next morning, the Aurea Capital Group office looked the same as always. Glass doors opened at 8 o'clock sharp. Employees walked along the corridors with laptops and folders. The coffee machine worked nonstop. Elevators took people up and down floor after floor. Everything was familiar on the outside, but the feeling inside was different. People moved more carefully. Voices became quieter. And everyone who entered furtively glanced in the direction of the main office. It was no longer empty. Elena Morales was back on the scene. She sat silently in her chair, her fingers resting on the edge of the table. In front of her lay that very list, names, departments, reasons for dismissal. Those who had been fired in the last few months under the guise of optimization, restructuring, noncompliance. Behind every name is a story, a destiny, and now a chance. She pressed the intercom button. Karina, invite Mark Ruiz to the office. And also contact the lawyers. We will begin the process of reviewing decisions on the cases of employees fired from June to December. Priority, accounting, IT, and the customer service department. Yes, Sonora Morales. The word Sonora sounded strange after months of being called Carmen. But inside she knew she was still herself. She just had a voice again. Mark Ruiz, a quiet, modest man in his 40s, walked into the office. He didn't know what to expect. He was one of those who were kept on the doorstep, not kicked out but not promoted either. He saw everything, understood everything, and remained silent. Not out of fear, but out of a sense that his voice would not be heard. Senor Ruiz, Elena began, I was told that you worked in the IT department for 6 years. That you modernized the internal reporting system. And that your proposals were rejected without explanation. It's true, he said carefully. Since you've been here, you've been telling the truth. And you haven't been listened to. I'm suggesting that you head the technical department. Are you ready? He looked at her as if he was hearing for the first time that the truth could be heard. Yes. Ready. Elena nodded. You will have to restore order. Quickly. Strictly. But fairly. Exactly as you did, he said, his voice firm. Other meetings followed. She brought back to work Marissa Benitez, a pregnant woman who had been fired for production reasons. In reality, she did so because she did not hide her position on the dismissals. She called back 2 lawyers who had been forced out after they refused to sign dubious contracts. She appointed a new internal auditor, an outsider with an impeccable reputation, and demanded a full report on the state of affairs over the past year. On the 4th day, she called a general meeting. No pomp, no coffee or snacks, just in the hall on the 1st floor. When she entered, people fell silent. The silence was not from fear, but from expectation, from confusion, from cautious hope. She stepped into the middle without a microphone and spoke. I don't need to tell you what happened within these walls. You lived through it yourself. I saw. I heard. I was there. Even if you didn't know. She looked around at the assembled group. Those who abused their power are no longer with us. Those who were afraid can now breathe. Those who remained silent are no longer obligated. She paused. From this day on, the company works differently. We are creating an ethics committee which will include not only top managers but also employees of different levels. We are bringing back the system of anonymous complaints. We are opening career sessions. We are ending the practice of contractual appointments. People were silent, but in this silence there was no longer fear. There was attention. I'm not perfect, and I can't fix everything in one day, but I promise no voice will go unanswered again. And at that moment, someone started clapping. Quietly, cautiously, then louder. And in a matter of seconds, the hall was filled with a sound she hadn't heard in years. Approval. Not for the title, but for the choice. A week passed. Elena sat in her office and looked at an old photograph, the one where she was standing with the first 10 employees of the company. Smiles. Faith. The beginning. She put her finger on the photo. I'm with you again. There was a knock at the door. Come in. Laura, the young assistant who had looked at Carmen with warm gratitude, entered. Now she held a small box in her hands. Forgive my boldness. This is for you. From all of us. Elena opened the lid. Inside was a badge, a small broom covered in gold paint. So that you don't forget how it all began. She smiled. Widely. Warmly. I will never forget. And she placed the badge next to the family photo. Because now in her company order began not with protocol, but with conscience. And it was based not on fear, but on truth. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video so you don't miss new stories.